Resiliency. Now that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. I taught about resiliency at university. So basically, in order to raise a resilient child, what you need is more resiliency factors than risk factors. So I just need to explain that. Risk factors are basically all the bad things that happen to you, that if you get enough of those bad things all accumulating, then you end up with bad outcomes. You go to jail, you have no qualifications, you've got drug and alcohol issues, all the negative outcomes. If you think of it as a spectrum, so here's the middle, and now this is the risk spectrum. So down this end is where you get all the negative outcomes and you go to jail and all the stuff I just said. This is the middle, and these are the resiliency factors. This takes you in the other direction. So down this end of the scale, you grow up to be qualified, earning a good income, a loving parent, you don't go to jail, you have a high quality life. So basically, your child, in order to be resilient, you want them to have more resiliency steps this way than they have risk steps this way. Now, all children are going to have some risk factors this way because we sort of research everything. And actually, you could say you can't develop resilience if you don't have some risk factors to develop the resilience too. So don't freak out that your child's got a couple of steps this way. Look overall and see, when we look at risk and resiliency factors, do I end up down this end? So if I think of risk factors, I mean, there's lots of them, but in no particular order. Risk factors could be things like having a parent who wasn't very well attached to their own parent as a baby is a risk factor. Just because it's not automatic for them to do all the loving stuff because they never received it themselves. So that can be a risk factor. Having parents with a criminal history is a risk factor. Having parents with any sort of mental health diagnosis is a risk factor. Moving around whole lots and changing schools all the time throughout your childhood so you don't really get settled in one place is a risk factor. I mean, there's not an exhaustive list. Being poor is obviously a big risk factor. Having parents that hit you is a risk factor. But the point is, no one of these risk factors throws you down the other end. I mean, being a single parent is a risk factor technically, but none of us would think a child starts in the middle, oh, he's got a single parent, oh, he's definitely going to jail. The whole idea is you have to have lots of risk factors before you end up down that end of the spectrum. Resiliency is often just the opposite to what risk factors are. They're the things that are going to lead to really good outcomes. So resiliency features that make your kid push towards that end of the spectrum are things like, well, having a parent who had a good attachment to their own parent is a resiliency factor. Speaking more than one language is a resiliency factor. Playing a musical instrument is a resiliency factor. Learning to play a musical instrument before the age of 7 is an additional resiliency factor. Having a parent stay at home with you in the first year of life, that's quite a huge resiliency factor. And the longer the parent stays at home, the bigger that resiliency factor is. So you get the idea. If you've got enough of these resiliency factors going, then you end up down this end of the spectrum where you grow up to, have all good outcomes and earn lots of money and be happy. So, yeah. Don't get overly strung out about the fact that we could say, oh, well, my child didn't have an at-home parent in the first year. They went into a childcare centre. Oh, I'm a single parent, and then start freaking out that you're down the risk end. Because actually, we could take two of those things. Let's say you're a single parent and the child goes into care in the first year of life. There's 2 risk factors, but that single parent has done some involved in education after secondary school. So any education you're involved in after secondary school is a step this way. You get up to the baby and you're quite responsive. So you get up into the baby a couple of times a night. So that's a resiliency factor for the baby. The baby's got good relationships with their grandparents. So there's another resiliency factor for the baby. You're really supported because you've got a good network of friends and you feel quite supported as a parent. There's another resiliency factor. You're singing a couple of waiata to the baby so that that's really reinforcing their te reo Māori and their sense of identity. So you've got to look at all the good things you're doing. Lots of ways, every time the baby smiles and you smile back at them and look at them lovingly, you're kind of adding a resiliency factor. So when we look at all the research, and we're breaking things down into nice simple sound bites, and we look at the sleep program and you find out the sleep program's really doing nothing for the baby and it's really just designed for the parents, so it turns out to be a risk factor. I don't want you beating yourself up about it. I put my kids on the sleep program and they're fine, right? It's not something I would do to my grandchildren because now I know, but I'm not going to spend lots of time worrying about it because, my children speak 2 languages and they've got parents with qualifications and they've got loving relationships with their grandparents and they've got so many resiliency factors that they can handle easily the fact that we put them on the sleep program in the first year. Kia ora whānau.